France, meanwhile, is in the final days of campaigning before the second round of its snap election this Sunday, but moves from a new left-leaning alliance and Macron's centrist party to strategically pull third-place candidates does look set to stop the far-right National Rally from getting a majority in Parliament. Liza Kamenov explains.
Left-wing alliance, the New Popular Front, along with President Macron's centrist coalition together, are pulling out all the stops to urge voters to block the national rally in Sunday's vote and deny them an absolute majority in Parliament. Their strategy has been to withdraw candidates from three-way runoffs to block the far right.
It's really to hinder the national rally, because it frees up a reservoir of votes that can then be reallocated either to a left-wing candidate or to a centrist candidate, and this will cause the national rally to lose a fairly significant number of seats.
A total of 224 candidates have pulled out, and their move appears to be paying off. The latest poll shows that the national rally could get just 190 to 220 seats, far less than the 289 seats needed for an absolute majority. But the far-right alliance, who dominated the first round of the elections, remains confident that they are at the doorstep of victory.
Je suis très confiante.
No, I'm very confident. The French people have a real desire for change. They expressed this desire for change, this freedom from the establishment in the first round. Because in reality, the only ones capable of having an absolute majority are the National Rally with our Republican allies who followed Éric Ciotti. We are the only ones who can offer a perspective to France with a majority of projects, a majority of construction, while the others only propose to fight the National Rally and once again plunge the country into a sort of quagmire.
The polling forecast that the New Popular Front is set to win between 159 to 183 seats, but this will depend entirely on if voters respond to the plea to block the far right. Meanwhile, the left-wing alliance and the president's camp insist that their joint strategy is simply to counter the far right and is by no means a coalition between the centrists and the left.
We're going to talk more about this now with political analyst François Hublet. François, thanks for joining us. This strategy of pulling third-party candidates now does seem to be working, at least for the far-left alliance, the left alliance, and the centrists. There's a new poll now that says the far right will get between 190 and 200 deputies, which is far short of the 289 it would need for a majority. How do you see all of this playing out?
Yeah, thank you for having me today. I think we have to be very, very cautious at that point. And the main reason of that is that if you look at these polls that announce 190, maybe 200, 220 seats, they are actually made under the assumption that a lot of voters that voted for different parties in the first round will actually vote for anyone who would stand against the RN in the second round. And that is still something that is kind of poised by uncertainty right now. So it's not at all clear that all of these transfers of voters will actually happen.
So given that, what are your prognostics? I mean, what are the two scenarios that you see happening?
So we did some projections for the Grand Continent, who's also running a lot of efforts in projecting and estimating the seats right now. And what we found is in two different scenarios. One where a lot of people will actually follow this advice of voting for whoever is standing against the far right. And another scenario, well, it would be less so and turnout would be lower. We found in the first scenario around 220, which is similar to the figures you just cited. In the other scenario, we find more like 270, which is close to actually looking like an absolute majority would be in reach. So that's why I was saying that caution is necessary at that point.
So in the meantime, we're seeing the different parties pulling candidates. Do you think that we're seeing the left that's ceding more to Macron's party, or is it the other way around? I mean, who's dropping off most?
I mean, historically, there's been a trend, and I think we were seeing that materialize this time as well, that the left was pulling out a bit more candidates than the center and the center right would do. I must also say it's in a way it's harder for the left because they are a bit more often in positions where they know they would not benefit that much from transfers from other parties. On the other side, I'm also the left-wing alliance is expected to get more seats than the center, so it's not like that would necessarily be weakening them more than the centrists.
In the meantime, let's come back to the far right, because as the days go by, there's been more and more scrutiny of some of these different far right candidates with some quite shocking cases. I mean, we've seen things like a picture of one woman wearing a Nazi soldier's hat. Jordan Bardella, who is the man who would be prime minister for the far right, said in a radio interview that there were a few, quote, infected sheep in the campaign. What are your thoughts on that?
And there's a lot of infected sheep, apparently, at least if we look at what has been published in the press in these past days. We're indeed seeing a lot of these cases. The main issue here is that while a few of these candidates will effectively be withdrawn, I mean, this is probably be at most half a dozen, probably just one or two or three, and it might not have a huge impact on voters locally. I think this is really hugely dependent on local situations. It's 577 constituency voting, with the far right being qualified at roughly 75% to 80% of these, and there's a lot of local situations that are very different from each other. So I wouldn't say that this is necessarily going to weaken them a lot. Now, what we've seen indeed is in last night's debate, the chairperson of Rassemblement National, Jordan Bardella, having really issues justifying his position, because he was saying there were a few sheep that were indeed on the wrong track, but there is much more than he actually suggested.
And so it does look like the far right will not be getting a majority in Parliament. The far right has been very clear in saying that Jordan Bardella will only be prime minister if the National Rally has a majority. So given that that looks less and less likely, how do you see this playing out in regards to who will be France's next prime minister?
And there's a variety of options there. I must say, first, it's not completely excluded that the far right gets an absolute majority at that point, especially if given the bad polls, I would say the bad poll numbers for the far right now, people start to demobilize on the left or on the center. So I wouldn't rule that out completely. Let's say maybe it's a third or 20% of probability at that point. Then talking about the other scenarios, there were talks about a grand coalition that would span from somewhere between the left and the moderate right, maybe from the Greens to Les Républicains, which is the Conservative Party. It's not completely clear at that point whether such a coalition could effectively materialize and under which conditions. One thing that might happen is that they may try to build some kind of technical agreement that would not really force them to have a strong project together, but simply make agreements that would allow them to stay in power, at least have some kind of technical government that would stay for a year or so.
All right, Francois, thanks so much for that, and thanks for sharing your expertise with us. That's a political analyst, François Hublet.
Thank you so much.